Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Lauren Pastrana, filling in for Jim DeFede, who's out sick. The Florida legislature is heading into its final 3 weeks. Last week, the Florida House passed a measure that would give voters in November the chance to eliminate property taxes on all homesteaded properties. The only exception would be funding for schools. But neither the Florida Senate nor the governor expressed support for what the House did, and that was obvious when Jim sat down with Senate President Ben Albritton a few hours after the House passed their property tax plan.
The House obviously passed earlier today a bill that they're proposing for property taxes that would abolish all homesteaded property taxes across the board, except for property taxes as it relates to schools. I know that that's probably a non-starter for you in the Senate, but give me your thoughts as to what the House's action entails and what it would mean if it did make it to the ballot.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you. It's always great to see you, Jim. The property tax, first point I want to make is the property tax issue as a whole is not simple math. It is trigonometry at a minimum. So it is a very, very challenging topic to try to find, what is fair across the board. The House, yes, the House passed a bill today that, and I have not watched it on television. We had our own session, but passed a bill today that would essentially eliminate all homestead property taxes, would save schools, to your point, and then first responders. And my takeaway from that is that their perspective is, and I would largely agree with that. Their perspective is these are core services, and we should be thoughtful about that. One thing they did do, though, which is as this entire conversation has been going on, one thing they did do, and I give them huge kudos for that, the governor for starting the conversation, and the House, they've had great proposals that have come out. This idea of a transition, if you will, maybe it happening over a period of time instead of all at one time, and to give the local communities a chance to adapt, that really is fascinating to me. So, I certainly intend on that being interjected to what we're doing here and what our proposal ends up being.
The speaker today said that he was, I don't know if frustrated was the word he would use, but he said that this has been discussed for the better part of a year, that the governor has been talking about this, that this idea of eliminating or doing away with substantial portions of property taxes has been floated for many, many months, and that why hasn't the Senate, I guess is the question he asks, why hasn't the Senate come forward with a proposal of its own? Why is the House the only one to move forward with this?
Well, first of all, let's start with this, and I believe this to be fair. The governor began this conversation, and rightfully so. So making sure that not just the Senate works to build consensus with the House, but also with the governor. He started the conversation and certainly is due his own ideas. So, Jim, what I would say is that we have been pouring ourselves into this topic here in the Senate for a long time, and we've looked at other states. We've looked at what the impacts would be. You're trying to do something good for Florida homeowners, which I believe everybody at the Capitol has interest in doing. But at the same time, you look at like a county like Miami-Dade, and the percentage is very low of their revenues that they operate government, with come from this. But then you look at like a Calhoun County or a Liberty County, and it's north of 80%. So, trying to figure out how to build, for lack of a better term, an equitable, fair approach and how to do this is just not that simple. And we've been pouring ourselves into it, continue to be. And listen, let me say this to you. I also know the time is coming sooner than later that we need to formalize all of this and pull all of our research together and build that consensus I'm talking about with the governor and with the House.
But you don't expect, it sounds like, that would take place during this regular session.
No, I don't know the answer to that question. Am I open to that? Yes. Am I open to doing it, later on? Yes, right? Because I have said before, it was interesting, the governor, I guess this morning maybe had a tweet, whatever you call them now, maybe not a tweet, but we're better off to get it right than to do it quickly. And I've been saying that personally for quite some time, which is why, we've done all the things we're doing to understand. I've spoken to numerous local elected officials about their own budgets, about their own challenges, and their own perspectives on this. So, I don't know if it's going to happen this time or not. Not trying to be cagey or coy, but I think I still go back to, and this premise matters. Getting it right really matters. And then, second of all, we are committed to making sure that whatever the mix is or whatever the proposal is, that the ballot summary is something. Like, Florida voters are smart, and whatever they read that is the ballot summary on what this is going to be, it needs to not be circular talk. It needs to be easily understood. They need to be able to read through that and sit there and say, you know what? I understand this. I see its impacts on me, see what its impacts could be on our community, and yes or no. That's simple.
Just to take a step back for a moment, philosophically, I know that the governor comes at this and he likes to use this analogy that he doesn't think it's appropriate for people who own their homes to pay rent on their property. I know others would look at that and sort of say, well, just because I paid off my house, there are certain services that I appreciate, that I enjoy, whether it's making sure the road in front of my house is properly paved, my sanitation is picked up, I have police and fire services, I have parks in the neighborhood that appreciate for my land value, those sorts of things. So I guess the governor's view has been that people shouldn't have to pay necessarily for those services once they own their home. And I know others disagree with that. Where do you come down on that issue of whether or not, once a person owns their home, should they be free of any tax liability?
So I do want to start with this, and that is, this is a decision that the Senate as a whole will make. I've said this before, I'm not king of the Senate, but I do have an opinion, and I'm happy to share that with you. And that is that if somebody owns their home, they're still receiving these services. I wouldn't agree with the premise of essentially renting your home essentially from the government, because there are core services that I think everybody, look, when they turn the spigot on in the house, they expect some clean water to come out, right? So there is a whole list of these things that I think are functionally core services that every homeowner should expect from their local community.
Obviously, the only thing that the legislature is required to do is pass a budget. You can forestall the question of property taxes to a special session afterwards. Same thing with redistricting, but the budget is something you're required to pass. I know that you were taken by surprise when the House released their budget a week ago, and that you then moved to release your budget. And clearly, there are differences between the House and the Senate versions of the budget. That's to be expected. But just on the mechanics of releasing the budget, typically those are coordinated between the House and the Senate. Did you see that as a sign of disrespect towards the Senate, that the House went about it the way they did?
No, I did not. They put their budget out. We had been we had been prepared to roll our budget out, I think, since February 4th, and had continued to alter our timeline, wanting to be sure that we roll it out, with our partners in the House. And you're only talking about a matter of days, which is the difference, right? We had flexibility built in and we're prepared to go, and they rolled theirs out, and ours is out, shortly following that. So no, I don't view it as that. And I do want to make this point too, because I think this really matters. Number one, getting the budget right matters more than anything. And last year took longer than anybody really wanted to build a budget and to get it done. But the end result was good for Floridians. It was a great budget, less than the previous year, continued to pay off debt, had new accountability and reporting metrics all through the budget. It was a really good budget for Florida. And I have every expectation we're going to do the same thing this time. And I look forward to working with our partners in the House. And the second point I'll make is that Jim, when you look at the budget as a whole, we're really save a couple of silos that we'll figure out. There's lots of places in the budget, and I mean lots. We're not that far off. We're actually closer as a starting point this year than we were last year, and I view that as very beneficial, and certainly would be something I would think that Floridians would look at and say, well, yeah, that's a good start.
When we come back, Jim asked the Senate President about the budget and his strained relationship with House Speaker Danny Perez. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Florida legislature is required to do only one thing, and that's pass a budget. This year, the House under Speaker Danny Perez is trying to cut off a lot of the emergency funds Governor Ron DeSantis has used during his time in office, arguing there needs to be greater oversight and accountability. During their conversation last week, Jim DeFede asked Senate President Ben Albritton about the Speaker's proposals, including cutting all funding for Hope Florida.
Let me just ask about Hope Florida. Do you believe that there is a place for Hope Florida in the budget for next year? Because the House right now doesn't seem to think there is one.
Yeah. Look, I have said from the very beginning that I believe the mission of Hope Florida is good. And, being able to connect people that are struggling to places where they can find the right resources and get life back on track makes perfect sense to me. I am wide open to the conversation about, how it's done, what type of, additional accountability and all those things. I'm wide open as president, and I believe the Senate would be too, on what those measures should be and the pros and cons of each. But, you ask about the mission of Hope Florida, and I would say that I think the idea and the mission of Hope Florida is a good one.
When it comes to emergency spending and the renewal of emergency declarations by the governor on immigration, do you think that's been appropriate? And more importantly, with those declarations comes his ability to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in often no bid contracts and in issues that we may or may not. I think we're right now dealing with an issue with the federal government where at least $600 million, possibly more, of money that was outlaid by the state for things like Alligator Alcatraz and other expenditures have not been reimbursed by the federal government, that money has passed due what should have been coming in. Does that concern you at all as to whether or not the state will be able to recoup those dollars from the federal government?
I would say concern would be the wrong word for me. I would say that, historically, and even today, I believe we're going to get reimbursed for those. I believe that the mission of, having a greater level of immigration, just call it accountability, is an important one. But as it relates to the federal government, sitting here today, do I wish we had already been reimbursed? Of course. But I do believe in the end that what they've said is true, that they're going to reimburse us for these things. And, at some point in time in the future, we're going to look back and say, wow, that was a pretty substantial blip on the screen. But, we've been reimbursed and things are continuing to move forward.
Do you think there has been enough accountability when it comes to how the governor and the executive branch has been spending that money?
There was no fanfare and, I didn't, take the media with me, but I will say this, and not trying to hide anything. I just felt like I wanted to go down and take a look at Alligator Alcatraz and see what the operation was about. It is certainly well done. I can give them credit for that. Very well thought out. And, the treatment of the folks that are in there appeared to me to be very good. And, that mission seems to be moving forward well. So from additional accountability and additional measures that will help, the government of the state of Florida to produce better government, I'm open to those conversations, every day. And I believe the Senate would be as a whole.
I did want to ask about Senate Bill 1134 by Senator Yarborough on DEI. There's been a number of folks who have raised some concerns about that bill, including the entire Miami Beach City Commission, which is made up of both Republicans and Democrats. They've raised concerns that the language in that bill is so broad and so ill-defined that, for instance, many issues, even if they were to support like a Jewish Heritage Month, that could be the focus of a litigation as a result of that bill. And I know that when that bill was in committee, the sponsors basically said, well, that'll be for the courts to decide. I see that as problematic because I'm not sure what the problem is that bill is designed to fix. I'm curious as to your thoughts as it relates to that bill.
Well, let me say this as a premise that I do not believe that, forcing DEI into the system is going to produce the result that society as a whole needs to produce. And that is, we should, as a society, we should be, focused on loving our neighbor as ourselves. I know that sounds very, canny or coy, but, that's how I live my life. So, there's a lot of things that are broken in society that if we just apply ourselves and our better angels, we would get better results. That being said, sure, there's a lot of concern in and around that bill. I've not heard that about the Miami City Commission. Appreciate you bringing that up to my attention. So just like any other bill, that bill has been heavily debated. It has been scrubbed, scrutinized. As it continues to move forward through the process, my goal is, like every time, I want the senators to do their work. I want their voice to matter. And, as it relates to their own communities and as it relates to their own perspectives, they're free to voice those opinions. Saw that today on several bills on the Senate floor. And quite frankly, it was glorious to watch. And that's what the Florida Senate, no, really, and that's what the Florida Senate should be about. We attack issues, we don't attack each other. And it was great to watch. We can agreeably disagree and we can have robust debate and conversation. That's what the entire government was set up to do. And we're doing our best to adhere to those.
Let me ask you one last question, because I do think it's a question that a lot of people, observers, sort of look at and like to play armchair psychiatrist sometimes, is the dynamic relationship between you and the speaker. The perception is that you and the speaker are not really in sync as you were when you both began, at the beginning of the previous session. And that there's some continuing tension, including last year, the failure by the House to take up a bill that was important for you, rural renaissance. How do you view your relationship currently with Speaker Danny Perez?
So it's been an interesting journey. And I mean that in the most beneficial terms. Danny Perez will be a friend of mine until God takes me off this earth. I will tell you, if I was broke down and my family was broke down in Miami, he'd be my first call. So, does that mean that we agree on all the policy and agree on certain appropriations and we agree on everything? No. There's a natural process that has shown itself, and that is the personality of the House and the personality of the Senate they're different. And does that mean that I don't respect the speaker and don't every single day look for ways to be able to work together with him and try to bridge some of the gap we have on policy ideas? No, it doesn't, right? I'm still interested in that, and I believe he is as well. So look, I think it's important for your viewers to understand that having disagreements inside the political process is completely natural. And it really is. It goes back to how you approach it. And, I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that I'm being, a good partner with the speaker. And we'll continue to find ways to be able to help Floridians and do a good job for Florida. He'll be a friend of mine until I'm not on this earth. And I'd take that to my grave.
When we come back, the Dolphins Cancer Challenge is Saturday. It's raised $100 million and counting for cancer research since 2010. I sit down with the duo behind the DCC to find out their why. Next.